Growing up in Forest Pines, I always knew something wasn't right. Sure, it was a pretty town, nestled between two mountain ranges, with trees that seemed to stretch forever, but there was an undercurrent of unease that ran through it. People didn't talk much, and when they did, it was often in whispers, especially about the old mill on the edge of town. The mill had closed down when I was about 12. I didn't understand why back then, but I remember how my parents had looked worried when the news came. The town had depended on the mill for generations. It wasn't just the jobs it provided, it was the heart of Forest Pines. Once the mill shut its doors, Forest Pines began to wither. Jobs were scarce, businesses closed, and before long, people started leaving. Except for us. My brother, Ryan, and I stayed behind with our parents. We didn't have much choice. Dad had been the mill foreman, and even though the job was gone, we couldn't afford to move. So, life carried on, but it wasn't the same. It felt like the life had been sucked out of the town. Ryan and I had always been close, but things changed after the mill shut down. He was older by 2 years, always a bit wilder than me, more willing to take risks. But after Dad started drinking heavily and our house became a place of constant tension, Ryan withdrew into himself. He stopped hanging out with his friends and started spending time in the woods near the old mill. I didn't think much of it at the time. Ryan always liked his solitude. But one day, when I was about 16, Ryan disappeared. It wasn't sudden. He'd been growing distant for months, barely speaking to anyone. But it wasn't like him to leave without saying anything. Mom was frantic, calling the few friends he had left, but no one had seen him. After a week with no word, we contacted the police. They found nothing, and the investigation was dropped as quickly as it began. People in town started whispering, as they often did, saying maybe Ryan had just left, like so many others had. But I didn't believe that. Ryan wouldn't have left without telling me. There was something else going on. I could feel it in my bones, and I swore I'd find out what had happened to him, no matter what. The next few years were a blur. I graduated high school, stayed in town, and got a job working at the local grocery store. Most of the kids I'd grown up with had left, and the town was practically a ghost town. But I couldn't leave. Not without answers. I spent my free time searching for clues about Ryan. I went through his old things, talked to people who had known him, but nothing ever pointed to where he might have gone. Until one day, about 5 years after Ryan had vanished, I got a phone call that changed everything. It was Mom, her voice shaking on the other end of the line. "Julia," she said, "you need to come home." I dropped everything and rushed back to the house. When I arrived, I found her sitting at the kitchen table, a crumpled piece of paper in her hand. She slid it across the table toward me. It was a letter. My heart raced as I read it. "Julia, I didn't want you to get involved in this, but there's no time. They're coming for me. I found out what happened at the mill, and they can't let me leave. Don't look for me. You need to get out of Forest Pines. There's no way out of this for me, but you still have a chance. I love you, Ryan." I stared at the letter, my hands trembling. Ryan was alive, or at least, he had been. But what did he mean? What had he found out at the mill? Mom was sobbing now, her face buried in her hands. "I thought he was gone for good," she cried. "I thought he was dead. I had to act fast. There was no way I was leaving Forest Pines. Not now. If Ryan had uncovered something dangerous, I had to know what it was. And I had to find him. I started at the mill. It had been abandoned for years, but I figured there might still be something there, some clue as to what Ryan had discovered. I waited until nightfall, not wanting to attract attention, and made my way through the woods toward the old mill. The trees were dense, and the only sounds were my footsteps crunching on the forest floor and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. When I reached the mill, it looked even more decrepit than I remembered. The windows were shattered, and the once strong walls were crumbling. I hesitated for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest. Then, taking a deep breath, I pushed open the rusted door and stepped inside. The place smelled of mold and decay. Broken machinery littered the floor, and dust hung thick in the air. I wandered through the dark corridors, unsure of what I was looking for. But something drew me deeper into the mill, a gut feeling that told me I was on the right track. Then, I saw it. In the back of the mill, hidden behind a stack of old crates, was a trapdoor. It was barely visible, but there was a faint outline in the dust where it had been opened recently. My heart raced as I crouched down and lifted the door. The steep staircase descended into darkness. I hesitated for a moment, then, gathering my courage, I started down the stairs. The air grew colder the deeper I went. The staircase seemed to go on forever, and the darkness was oppressive. Finally, I reached the bottom, and what I found took my breath away. It was an underground bunker, vast and filled with strange equipment. Computers, monitors, and machines I couldn't even begin to understand. But it wasn't the technology that sent a chill down my spine, it was the people. Or rather, the lack of them. The bunker was deserted, but it looked as if it had been used recently. Papers were scattered across desks, coffee cups half filled with cold liquid, and the monitors were still on, displaying strange data that made no sense to me. What was this place? I began searching through the papers, trying to make sense of the information. It didn't take long to figure out that the mill hadn't just been a place to process timber. It had been a front for something far more sinister. The documents hinted at illegal experiments being conducted in the mill's underground facility. The town had been used as a testing ground for something, but the specifics were unclear. Then, I found Ryan's name. My heart stopped. There, on a report dated just a few months ago, was my brother's name, listed as a subject. I flipped through more files, my hands shaking. Ryan had been taken. He hadn't just stumbled upon something dangerous, he had become part of it. I didn't have time to process what I was reading before I heard footsteps above me. Panic surged through me. Someone was coming. I grabbed as many papers as I could, stuffing them into my backpack, and bolted for the staircase. I barely made it halfway up before I heard voices. They were getting closer. There was no way out. I couldn't go back to the bunker, and I couldn't make it to the top of the stairs without being seen. My only option was to hide. I pressed myself against the wall of the staircase, praying they wouldn't find me. The voices grew louder, and then I heard something that made my blood run cold. "It's clear now," a man said. "She'll be back though. You know she's looking for her brother." I held my breath. They knew about me. They were expecting me. I stayed as still as possible as two men walked down the stairs. I caught a glimpse of them, tall, muscular, and armed. They passed right by me, not noticing me in the shadows, and disappeared into the bunker. I waited until their footsteps faded, then I sprinted up the stairs and out of the mill. I didn't stop running until I reached the safety of my car, parked just outside the woods. My hands shook as I fumbled for the keys and drove away. When I got home, I locked the doors and windows, pulling the blinds shut. I couldn't stay here anymore. They were onto me, but I couldn't leave either, not until I figured out what had happened to Ryan. That night, I went through the documents I had taken from the bunker. The more I read, the more horrified I became. The mill had been part of a secret project, run by a private corporation called Blackston Industries. They had been conducting genetic experiments on the townspeople, using the town's isolation to hide their operations. Ryan had somehow become involved, and now he was missing, presumably taken by Blackston to cover their tracks. I barely slept that night, my mind racing. I had to find out more, but I didn't know where to start. I needed help. I called Kyle, an old friend from high school who had become a reporter. He had always been good at digging up information, and I knew he would help me if I asked. When I told him about Ryan, he agreed to meet me the next day. Kyle was skeptical at first, but after I showed him the documents, he was all in. We spent the next few days investigating Blackston, using his connections to dig up whatever we could. What we found was shocking. Blackston wasn't just some small-time corporation, it was huge, with ties to the government and various industries across the country. They were untouchable. But we kept digging, and eventually, we found something. Kyle managed to track down a former employee of Blackston, someone who had worked on the project at the mill. He agreed to meet us in a remote location, far from town, where we wouldn't be overheard. When we arrived, I was nervous. The man Marcus looked rough, like he had been through hell. He was paranoid, constantly looking over his shoulder, but eventually, he told us everything. Blackston had been experimenting with a virus, something designed to enhance human abilities, but it had gone wrong. The virus was unstable, and instead of making people stronger, It had deadly side effects. They had been testing it on the people of Forest Pines for years, using the mill as a cover. Ryan had been one of the subjects. He had stumbled upon the truth, and they had taken him to prevent him from exposing them. Marcus didn't know where Ryan was now, but he told us one thing that chilled me to the bone. If they took him, he's not coming back. I refused to believe that. Ryan was out there somewhere, and I was going to find him. Kyle and I devised a plan. We were going to expose Blackston. It was risky, but it was the only way to get justice for Ryan and the other victims. Kyle had connections in the media, and we planned to leak the documents we had gathered, along with Marcus's testimony. It was a long shot, but it was our only hope. The night before we were set to go public, I got another phone call. This time, it wasn't my mother. It was Ryan. Julia. His voice was weak, barely a whisper. I don't have much time. Ryan? I gasped, my heart racing. Where are you? I've been looking everywhere for you. You need to stop, he said, his voice cracking. They're watching you. They'll come for you next. I don't care, I shouted. I'm not letting them get away with this. I'm going to expose them, Ryan. We're going to make them pay. There was a long pause, and then Ryan said something that made my blood freeze. They already know, Julia. They're coming for you right now. Before I could respond, the line went dead. Panic surged through me. I grabbed my things and bolted out the door. I had to get to Kyle, but I wasn't fast enough. Just as I reached my car, a black SUV pulled up. 3 men in suits stepped out, guns drawn. I didn't stand a chance. Underscore 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 underscore. I woke up in a hospital bed, disoriented and confused. My head throbbed, and my memory was fuzzy. A nurse entered the room, checking my vitals, but when I asked her what had happened, she avoided eye contact. It took days for me to piece together what had occurred. Kyle was dead. The documents were gone, erased as if they had never existed. Blackston had won. They had silenced us, just like they had silenced Ryan. I was discharged from the hospital under heavy surveillance. The official story was that I had been in a car accident, but I knew the truth. They had wiped everything clean, covered their tracks so perfectly that no one would ever believe what we had uncovered. Ryan's body was never found. I never heard from him again. I returned to Forest Pines, broken and defeated. The town was as lifeless as ever, a place where whispers ruled and the truth was buried deep beneath the surface. I still see the mill sometimes, standing as a reminder of what we lost, but I know better than to go near it now. In the end, I didn't save Ryan. I didn't stop Blackston. But I learned one thing. There are some things in this world that are too powerful to fight. Some secrets are too dangerous to uncover. And sometimes, the people you love most are the ones who pay the price.